Hello and welcome back to Unmodern Romance. Today I'm going to be talking about why politics matter in a relationship. So I feel like this is one of the more extreme things that is pervasive in our time right now, is that everything has been boiled down into politics. And I think regardless of which side that you're on, and I'm actually a moderate, I feel like that should probably be stated, that you can't look at the current political climate and not blame the far left. And the reason I say that isn't that I think that the right doesn't play into it, but more so than not, the idea of identity politics and that your politics are a representation of who you are as a person with innate qualities like, as white people vote Republican, black people vote Democrat. So if you're telling me I can't or shouldn't vote Democrat, it's not because you're actually going to have a conversation with me about, voter reform or taxation principles. What you're actually talking about is you're invalidating my identity as a race, as a gender, as sexual orientation, as insert here. You're no longer talking about what politics is actually about, which is laws, right? Like the actual politics of politics, no one wants to talk about. No one wants to talk about the budget or money or fiscal policy or like the things that most of the national laws are about. No one wants to talk about. So, my own politics, I feel like I get kind of lambasted by both sides because I refuse to be for either side. So when you talk about the Trump presidency, which is already kind of, you're already, waiting for me to, if you're a Trump supporter, you're waiting for me to say one bad thing about Trump. And if you're not a Trump supporter, you're waiting for me to say one good thing about him. However, to me, of the Trump presidency, the two biggest things that happened was during both the Kavanaugh hearing when they were, going to be appointing him as the Supreme Court, as well as the first Trump impeachment. The two largest spending bills in U.S. history at the time were passed. And they were passed like the same day as these other two big events that are very, you're one side or the other about. So, here's the other thing. Both spending bills were passed pretty uniformly by Republicans and Democrats. And there was so much pork. And it's all about making politicians rich. And it's hidden behind these very divisive political issues. And, say what you want about Trump being a savior or a madman. He was at least enough in on the game to not draw attention to it. Like there's very few people in politics, actual politicians, that were lambasting that as an idea and saying like, hey, we need to pay, this is the thing that matters. Like this is the thing that makes you emotional to pick sides. Here is the thing that is actually important. The boring fiscal stuff, the boring line items and spreadsheets and policies and laws. So I think that is, in a nutshell, the biggest problem. However, I do think that people's politics, it is an extenuation of values and how they think, and also of tribal thinking. So if you have somebody who's on the right or who's on the left and is like all in, and they aren't looking at information from the other side because they're very like keyed in on this is what's right, these are my people, these are, I want to impress other liberals or I want to impress other conservatives, so I'm going to have the most liberal or the most conservative response ever. I think, like both sides are absolutely atrocious and awful, and we need to get away from that. We need the people who are moderates, the people who are going to question, if something on your side doesn't make sense, you're not afraid to ask questions. I think that both sides have done and been responsible for horrible enough things that both sides are like, we're not even going to talk about anything bad my side does until you address what your side is doing. And I think that is on both sides. I really think that what we need is to get rid of political parties because, what we kind of brush under the rug because it was a guy from our side who did it, rather than, the idea that there's sides there. I also think one of the best political quotes ever is from Jesse Ventura, who was famously a professional wrestler before he was a politician. And he said that politics is just like professional wrestling in the sense that, they go out in front of a crowd and act like they hate each other, but behind closed doors, they're best friends. I think that rings true to me because most of the things that people are voting on and what most of politics is money and spending and what things get allocated funds. And I really think that where you're dealing with power in a government is you have these agencies that once they're created, like once the spending bill that allocates them money and allocates them a budget pretty much in perpetuity, because once an agency kind of comes into function, it doesn't really go away, that there's now really no government oversight. Like Congress doesn't really oversight. The president can give some government policy, but there's no true neutrality or true oversight for many of these organizations. So, you look at the FBI or the CIA or a lot of these intelligence and governmental agencies, almost no oversight. And, if something horrible happens, the idea that the president could go in and fire everyone or could go in and, strip them of their budget and say, oh, you're not an agency anymore because you did some horrible, heinous things, that's not a thing. So, getting back to politics in a relationship, I think, what I've always told people is I don't really care what a partner or a potential partner votes for. What I care about is how you're going to vote in the home. Like the thing that matters to me is where do you believe in terms of when we're making decisions as a couple. So let me give you a really good example of that. Abortion is a huge hot button topic. So a lot of women, whether you agree or disagree with this opinion, believe that it is, women's rights when you're talking about abortion. So they are very pro-choice as an ideologue because they don't want to hurt other women or feel like they're hurting other women. Okay. I don't really care who my spouse or partner votes for in an election. I care who wins, sure, but I also feel like, if you have a democracy, it's not that one vote that is going to make or break an election. Like the politician needed to run a good campaign to be in the running to begin with. Like if they won, they won. It's, your partner didn't do that. So what's more important to me is, would you abort my kid? Like, do you believe in abortion on a personal level? And a lot of people will answer, I couldn't do that to my kid, but I'm not going to tell another woman what to do. And I always want to make sure, because, I'm pro-life, I want to ensure that if I'm in a relationship with another human being and they're my partner, that I do not want my kid aborted. I do not want abortion practiced in my home. So I feel like that is a fair meeting ground because we're not talking about things in the abstract. The argument of, well, what about if it was rape or if it was incest? I'm like, well, I'm not going to rape you and we're not related. So again, neither one of those arguments are important. they're not applicable to what we're talking about. What we're talking about is if you get pregnant and we're together, because like if we're having sex and we're in a relationship and you get pregnant, I don't want you to abort my child. So if that is something that makes you uncomfortable and that is not something you can knee-jerk agree to, we should not be having sex, and that should not be put in your plate. And if you did end up getting pregnant and you go against that, you are a horrible human being because you've lied to someone else. And you understand what I'm saying? Like, you need to be able to have those conversations with a partner in terms of, you know what I mean? Like, you need to be able to have that conversation with a partner that this is what we're going to do in this situation, and I can respect you enough and your opinions enough to carry out your wishes, and we can either come to terms or we can't. Like, the best thing, in my opinion, that you can do in a relationship is figure out who you are and be like, this is who I am, and this is what I'm looking for, and this is what I can and can't accept in a partner. And that's all you can do. And then the other person can think about what you said and think about what they want and think about what they can and can't accept and see if that's compatible. And they can also hopefully be able to communicate that to you so that you can understand, if the other person can accept them. And if you have compatibility, you have compatibility. And if not, you should walk away before things get toxic. But if you tell someone a lie, what's the point? Like, what are you doing here? I mean, you can only take somebody on their word for sure. And I think that, like, just because someone told me that doesn't mean that we're jumping in the sack or I'm going to put myself in a situation where abortion could happen or that those things could happen. But that's definitely something that I, as a value judgment, would bring up early on. However, I will say this: if you have someone who thinks abortions are cool, that it is a status symbol, you can't trust anything out of their mouth at all. I think that you have to appreciate where someone's character is because, going back to the abortion issue, if things get hard, if things get difficult, if you say that, like, oh yeah, I would never get an abortion, and the first time you have sex, which is usually, somewhat early on, not necessarily in the relationship, but like, put it this way, unless your first time having sex is after marriage, the first time you have sex is the most vulnerable time and the time when there is the least commitment of when you will ever have sex with that person. So if you get pregnant the first time out, all of a sudden you now have a situation that is less stable than maybe what you thought you were agreeing to, that like, sure, I agreed to never get an abortion, but I thought it would be a couple of years into the relationship. I've been having sex for 10 years, never gotten pregnant before, and I thought that I, could follow the precautions that I followed for that 10 years, and I would have another good 10 years of no pregnancies accidentally, and that didn't end up being the case. So I think that you should trust but verify. You should have these conversations with someone. But as recently seen in my breakup, people lie. People lie all the time to get what they want, and people lie in relationships all the time. So that's something you need to be cognizant of, and something that when you start seeing, especially if there's not children involved, get out of there as quickly as you can and cut ties. And honestly, my best advice is keep sex out of a relationship until you're willing to make those commitments, because you can never be 100% sure that pregnancies won't happen. And until you 100% trust the other person to do what they say that they're going to do, until you're 100% certain that you want to be raising a child with them, it's kind of better not to risk it. And that's the best I can tell you, is it's better not to risk it. And if you are with somebody who you are comfortable with them getting pregnant with, you might as well put a ring on it and get them married. That's best advice.